leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they insulted him, he did not reply. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. May God bless the reading of his word.
Amen. Great song, a great reminder of why we are here. What a blessing it is to be here and come together as a community of faith and to worship. Be here and worship. Well, I want to start today by having you imagine something. I want you to imagine that you were one of the disciples. You were there with Jesus during pretty much his whole ministry there in Galilee and then in Jerusalem. And now it's after the crucifixion, it's after the resurrection. In fact, it's years and years later, and you're older now, and you're thinking back on the years you spent with Jesus. And what is the first thing that you would remember about Jesus? It's a good question, because there's so much to remember. I mean, some people might say, well, gosh, probably the sermon, one of the sermons, Sermon on the Mount, let's say. You know, the Beatitudes, that's what I'll remember most. Or someone else might say, are you crazy? Oh, it's the miracles, right? Who would remember the miracles more than anything else? And someone else would say, no, the parables. The parable of the prodigal son. That's what I would remember first about Jesus. Well, it's great because, you know, we can read the book of 1 Peter, and 2nd, 3rd Peter, and these are books by a disciple, Simon Peter. And in 1 Peter, Peter's first letter to other Christians out of Asia Minor, he is remembering something about Jesus. Right here in the 2nd chapter, he remembers something about Jesus, the thing that he wants to tell them about. The very first recollection he has about Christ. And it's nothing that Jesus did. That's not what Peter remembers most. Peter remembers what Jesus didn't do. Remember the words Ellie read for us a moment ago? He was reviled, but he did not revile in return. He suffered, but he did not threaten. You see, Peter could have remembered all sorts of things. I'm sure he did with great joy, remembered what Jesus said, what Jesus did. But what had an impact on him is what Jesus didn't do. Now this tells us, I think, something about Simon Peter. He was a person of action. In fact, we see over and over in the Gospels, he was a person who would talk, who would act without thinking. Talk first, act first, think later. And so here's the one thing about Jesus that he wanted to remember, is the fact that when Jesus was caused to suffer, he didn't return in life, try to bring suffering on other people. Peter noticed that because I'm sure Peter knew how he would have reacted. Say somebody came up to him and started threatening or started hurting him. And what would he do? Well, we know what Peter would do. Peter lashed out at him. He would lash out, he would even draw a sword. But here's Jesus, Peter remembering Jesus for what he did not do. Isn't this true of our friends, too? People that we decide that we want to associate with in our lives. The great thing about friendship, you don't have to be friends with anybody, really. You have to have family, you have to be with them. But friends, you get to decide who your friends are. And a lot of times we decide who our friends are by what they do. We're impressed with that. We like what they do. But a lot of times as well, it's because of what they do not do. We see somebody that we admire, and we see them in a situation where maybe they are being tempted. And they don't do anything. They don't give in to that temptation. Maybe we see somebody who's a friend of ours, and something terrible happens. I mean, their world comes crashing down, and they've got every reason to give up. But they refuse to give up. It's what they don't do, and we respect them because of that. We are drawn to them because of what they don't do. We spend a lot of time in church talking about what we are supposed to do in this world, what Christ is calling us to. And that is good. But I think it's good for us too, as followers of Christ, as disciples, to think it is just as important what we choose not to do. Not to give in. Not to give up. When I think about this, I think about Abraham Lincoln. He was known for doing so much. So many things that we could probably sit here and talk about that, list them. We've talked about Lincoln a lot with that movie that came out last year about him. And he's known for doing lots of great things, but he is also known, many people really respect him for what he did not do. For at the end of the war, there were so many in the North that were calling for vengeance. But that is something that Lincoln would not do. He would not call for vengeance. In fact, in his second inaugural address, he would say it, charity for all, mercy for all. And that's why he is remembered. And that's why a lot of great people are remembered too. Not only for what they do, for the great things they do, but for the temptations they resist, for the things that they refuse to do, things that they know are not right. But it's good for us to know that there are heroes out there that can resist that. Resist doing what they know they shouldn't do. But it's good news for all of us as well, because a lot of the times what we do is we, in church and other places, we hold up the great heroes. We hold up Lincoln, and Apostle Paul, and Moses, and Martin Luther, and Albert Schweitzer, and hear enough of that and start thinking, well, how can I ever match what those people do? I mean, I can't go if I can. I guess I could go to Africa. But let me tell you, I'm not going to go to Africa and give my life to helping poor people. That's just not going to happen. I can't match that. I can't match what the Apostle Paul did. Of course, I can't match what Moses did. None of those. But you know what? I can and you can match what they did not do. You can match what they did not do. For when you are facing a temptation, and there it is right in front of you, and you want to give into it, and you don't, you summon the discipline, you summon the courage not to give into that temptation. And let me tell you, when you don't give into a temptation, nobody could have done that better than you just did. Right? You did it really, really well. And you need to be proud of that. The same way, not only giving into temptations, but giving up as well. What a temptation it is to give up in this world. And to be able to say that that is something I will not do. That is something that I refuse to do in this world. Again, we see it real well in Jesus' followers. Not only this ability to do the right things, but also this ability to avoid doing things that are destructive. And think about the Apostle Paul. I love that part in the Apostle Paul's writings where he talks about all that he's been through. He says, I was whipped 4 different times, 40 lashes minus 1. And I was beaten with a rod 3 times. And I was stoned once. Now, with the Apostle Paul, there is a little bitterness there. You hear it come out. But by and large, with the Apostle Paul, the way he lived his life, the way he responded to beatings, the way he responded to criticism was with love. I think that's the secret. We want to start thinking, well, how do we avoid doing these things we shouldn't do? How do we muster the courage? How do we muster the discipline to say no? To not do that thing that we shouldn't do? Well, it's love. And that's what the Apostle Paul did. Love brings us all together, binds us all together. Love for God, love for one another. And it's that love, too, that enables us to say no when we are tempted. To say no when we're tempted to give in. Love for God, love for ourselves, love for our friends, love for our families, love for our church community. It's those things that enable us there. To say, no, I'm not going to give in. Well, that's good news. It's open to us all. Each and every one of us, we all have this opportunity. It doesn't take great genius to say no, to refuse to do something. It doesn't take great talent to say no. We are, all of us, limited in what we can do. There are talents I do not have. Each one of us is limited in the talents that we have, the things we can accomplish in this world, but there are very few limitations on what we can say no to. in the end, that may be what you are known most for. Believe it or not, the end of it all, it may be what you said no to that people remember you for. Or someone might be out there and see you being slandered, being gossiped about. You don't know it, but their eyes are on you. And you refuse to slander. You refuse to gossip in return. And that makes an impact. You might be out there and all the world is crashing in on you, and you have every reason to give up and to be embittered by it all. And someone is watching you, seeing that you aren't being embittered. You aren't being embittered. Some person out there may be witnessing right when you're facing a big temptation in your life. And when you say no to it, when you refuse that temptation, they will remember that. It could well be that all the good things that we do in this world, when we wrap them up all together, are not equal to the things that we have said no to. That might be the biggest impact we have of all. Right there is what people pay attention to. It's what they see. It's what they recognize. And so let me conclude by asking you right now, having you think about this, both right now as you go from this place. Right now, what is the biggest thing? The biggest thing that you have refused to do? Let's bow. Loving God, you have given us so many blessings, and the point of them, what we are called to do, is to say yes to them, and to open up our lives to these blessings and to enjoy them fully. Lord, we think of especially the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ. We are called to open our lives to that blessing. But loving God, there are things too that we are called to refuse, to say no to. And that's what we ask, Lord, be with us and give us the strength we need to say no to the temptations, say no to giving up, giving in. Lord, help us to say no to those things that we are called that aren't going to be of help to us. Draw us away from you. It is in Jesus Christ's name we pray.